We're here at Lousehill Copse to do some winter tree identification. All the species we'll be looking at today are widespread and common. When I walk through a wood like this, it's like everything's in colour. It's identifiable, and it's just a pleasure to be able to walk through at different times of the year and see things in different stages of leaf and bud and fruit. A little knowledge is a good thing. A winter tree identification is something that you can do alone when walking the dog or taking a lot of friends along. We're here at Lousehill Copse, but obviously you can do this at any woods in the country. I always found it really enhances my enjoyment of nature if you can actually understand a bit about it. Actually learn the different kinds of tree, learn how to identify different species. Identifying trees in the summer is very easy because of the leaves. We'll be looking at things like bark, buds, twig shape, tree shape, any fruits still hanging on the trees, any seeds, so that you can identify these things all year round. There are 32, 33 native tree species in this country and estimated around 600 non-native species. I'd be interested to know how many we do find today. I would probably guess a couple of dozen. All right, well, we're going to see some more trees. Absolutely one of my personal favourites. This is a beech tree. They're just magisterial. The most impressive thing about beech trees is the smoothness of their bark. For such a large tree, that's a very smooth bark that looks like stone. And for some reason, it motivates people to carve their names and initials in it occasionally. The leaves are fairly familiar shape. A really wonderful green in the spring and the summer. It's got quite identifiable buds, what's known as alternate. Brown, reddish brown, sort of spear-like buds sticking out either side of the twig. So it's quite identifiable from both the buds and the bark and the fact that we're surrounded by leaves. This is a beech nut, or at least the casings of the nut. It's not furry, is it? It's sort of spiny character. On a really good year, you'll be walking through a beech wood and there'll just be crunch, crunch, crunch underfoot because there'll just be so many. We haven't got many here this year. This is probably the easiest one of the lot. It's an oak tree, of course it's an oak tree. We're surrounded by oak trees here. It's the most common tree in Britain, along with the ash tree. There are two native species. There's this one, which is called Pedunculate Oak. Pedunculate's an odd word. What it basically means is that the acorns that it has are on a sort of stem. Peduncle is just a flashy botanical term for a stem, as far as I can gather. It's the Quercus robur. Quercus is the genus, robur's species. The other native oak species we have is the sessile oak, Quercus petrea, but that's much more common in the West Country because it prefers the damper climate. So there's not much of it in the Thames Valley, so to speak. We're in the middle of a woodland, and so the oaks are very close together. So they compete, they go up. If you plant an oak tree in the middle of a park, in the middle of a field, its canopy will be wider, so it's a spreader in that sense. These are, because they're quite close together, are strangely a good deal taller than they are wide. No acorns, but certainly you've got the cups in which the acorns sat, and as you can see, they're on a stalk. So that's Pedunculate Oak, usually just called English oak. Oaks enjoy a season when they produce heaps and heaps of acorns. It's known as the mast year. The ivy you see here, climbing up all these trees, is not terribly attractive, but it is good habitat for certain birds and so forth. You might see as we've walked around chunks where the ivy's been cut and then the rest of the ivy up the tree dies, because what can also happen if a tree's got heaps and heaps of ivy on it, on a gusty, stormy night, it kind of acts as a sail and it can blow a tree over. That can happen. We're quite sheltered in here, so that's not going to be a problem. It doesn't actually have a negative impact upon the tree. It's not as though it's parasitic in that sense. It only causes the problem for the tree if it gets right up to the top and covers the canopy. The other way of telling an oak tree in the winter is probably the shape of the branches. They sort of go off in all crazy directions. This isn't merely an aesthetic point. You know, boat builders in days gone by would go through woods looking at oak trees because some of the beams you go, oh, that curve there, that'd be perfect for this piece of the boat or that part of the boat. So they actually picked out timbers to build their boats. So oak trees are quite identifiable in that sense. This is elder, still got its leaves on, so it's quite identifiable. Sambucus nigra, and we use it to make elderberry cordial and wine and so forth, the berries that is, which it hasn't got any on right now. It can get bigger, it can be 6 metres, just not very often. So it's kind of borderline. Most people probably don't call it a tree because they don't see a really big example. This is the kind of example you usually get, this kind of size. For what is not a very large plant, it's got a very sort of nutmeg grater kind of bark. So that makes it quite distinctive as well. From each bud you get a number of leaves, a number of leaflets. Technically that is the leaf because it comes from one bud, and these are technically leaflets. But there are other species that have these kind of compound leaves, ash trees, rowans for example, which we should see some examples of at some point. So there we go, that's elder. A word about dead wood. Dead timber is something we do leave lying around in the woodland. Some people go, well, why don't you clear it up? It looks a mess. Well, first of all, it's a natural habitat, so it's not supposed to be a pristine garden. And secondly, the dead wood actually is an incredible resource in terms of supporting other animals as it rots down. Heaps of invertebrates and so forth like it. The old saying is that there's more life in a dead tree than there is in a live one. When I was a kid, someone fibbed to me that there's as much of a tree below ground as there is above ground. Actually, it's not quite right. The roots in trees in Britain really don't go more than 2 or 3 metres deep. They go out much more, usually just beyond the extent of the canopy. Anyway, magnificent. Great for kids to play on. In the same way that we tend to leave lying dead wood just to rot down and be a habitat for a large number of species, standing dead wood is also valuable too. I mean, eventually it'll fall down, but I mean, right now it's very good habitat for a wide range of species. Woodpeckers and that kind of thing burrow in and drill their holes into them. Other species of invertebrate also inhabit standing dead wood. So you just leave it there and let it do its thing.